So there's lots of different ways that qualitative data can be collected. So here's just a list of 5. So they can be in a structured interview, an unstructured interview, a semi-structured interview, focus groups, or an observation. So the first type of interview that we're going to look at is an unstructured interview. This is an interview structure where there could be just one question, and then this question leads to another. And as you could probably guess, there isn't a structure to the interview. It's more like a conversation because it's much more flexible. There are advantages and disadvantages with using the structure within an interview. An example of an advantage is that it is more informal. This can allow an interviewee to feel much more comfortable and less stressed. However, it could also be a disadvantage if the interview is too formal. Then it might not be a successful interview. Another advantage is that you're likely to get great validity, as the interviewee is more likely to say what they want in more detail because of how comfortable they feel within the interview. The final advantage is that their response can be flexible and therefore can be easy to come up with follow-up questions to try and get more information out of the interviewee. However, with the structure of an interview also comes with disadvantages. One example of this is that it's harder to analyse and compare between two different interviews answers given by participants. Another disadvantage is that you'll be collecting a small sample, as the length of time of the interviewing process will be much longer. And an unstructured interview is obviously much more time consuming. The smaller sample collected also makes it less representative of the population. The second type of interview to look at is a structured interview. This type of interview differs from the previous one in the way that there is a much stricter set of questions. This is because it needs to be the same in each interview. Also, conversations never need to go further than a set of questions. Advantages of this method of interview could be that it is constantly focused on the topic, and it is much easier and simpler to gather the data. The results are easier to generalize, as there is much less variation in the interview. Lastly, this type of interview can be done face-to-face, or it can be done electronically, maybe via like Skype or something, or even via email. This can reduce the duration of the interview considerably for the researcher, because if it is done electronically, then they don't necessarily need to be there whilst the research is actually being done. In this type of interview, there are also disadvantages. For example, this type of interview, the interviewee must stick to the agreed set of questions, and they might not give as much detail on their answers. Unlike an unstructured interview, the researcher is unable to use follow-up questions to try and extract more detail from the participant. Depending on the set of questions, the interviewee could be forced to respond to a limited choice of answers, therefore not responding truthfully and jeopardizing the reliability of the interview. This type of interview can make it difficult obtaining reliable data on feelings, thoughts, and attitudes from participants. The last type of interview structure to look at is a semi-structured interview. As you can probably guess, this type of interview structure is a mixture of the previous two. Within this type of interview, there are a few important questions that crucially need to be asked. However, there is a lot of flexibility. The researcher can ask follow-up questions on the ones that they have asked to get more out of the interviewee, which isn't possible with a structured interview. Positives that come with using this type of interview structure is that there are some guided questions for the interviewee, so it's not structured and formal, yet it doesn't allow them just to waffle on about anything. They do need to stay relatively on topic. And secondly, they have an element of flexibility to respond, and you don't, as the interviewer, also have the ability to use follow-up questions to try and get more out of the interviewee's answer. However, this process could also be quite time-consuming as well, which could be a disadvantage of using this particular type of qualitative research method. Focus groups are another form of interview that can be done to collect data from a large set of people. However, when using this method of data collection, there are again positives and negatives for using this. For example, advantage of this method is that it allows you to get a consensus from a group, so it allows you to get the overall feeling from the whole group of people. And you can observe the group's dynamics and social customs to see how people work around each other and in groups. This can allow you to get a better idea of the person than if you were just doing a one-to-one interview. Also, if you have a lot of people to interview, by doing a focus group with all of them, it makes the process much less time-consuming than having to interview everyone individually. However, disadvantages of focus groups to interview people are that it might not be representative, as confidence in the group might vary. This means that people in the group who aren't as confident talking or don't get their opinions across might not be represented in the overall consensus of the group. You might get some people in the group who love to talk and share their ideas, and then you might get some who don't as much and would prefer to stay quiet and take a back seat. All interviews can be recorded if consent is gathered from the interviewees. However, with focus groups, you would need to get consent from everyone, which could be a challenge. And then even if you did manage to get consent from everyone, there might be lots to analyse if you need to transcribe everything that everyone has said, which would therefore be incredibly time consuming. Lastly, with a focus group, the research either can be there or they don't need to be necessarily. But if they're not, then they risk the participants going off topic and therefore make the focus group pointless because they won't have discussed what you need them to make your research valid. Another example of a qualitative collection method are questionnaires. So some advantages of using questionnaires is that if the interviewer isn't involved, then the person answering the questions might feel more relaxed, and therefore this will decrease the level of bias. This is because they can take their time to answer the questions, and the researcher won't be able to potentially direct them with how they wish them to answer the question. Also, these questionnaires can be very easy to distribute. For example, hundreds could be sent across emails, so this is very cheap and an easy way to perform a study. However, an issue with this is that sending hundreds of questionnaires via email, when people receive them, they can be simply clicked and deleted because they might see this as spam or even just can't be bothered to complete it. A disadvantage of the questionnaires is that the researcher could read the responses on the questionnaires and interpret their answers incorrectly, which means the research is decreasing their own study's reliability. This is the issue with the research not being present, as it means they can't clarify anything with the participant whilst they're completing the study. A main issue with questionnaires is that people could be dishonest, as they may want to come across as the ideal person or want to give the answers that they know the researcher is looking for. This is social desirability, where people will answer questions dishonestly to make themselves look better. So participant observation is where the researcher actively is participating whilst observing, and non-participant is where the researcher is standing by the side, observing the sport and not participating. Advantages of observations is that you are witnessing players in their natural environment, so they could be a part of the study whilst playing their own sport rather than just asking questions about it. Some disadvantages of this type of observation tells you what is happening but not why. So it says how many shots someone has made in football, for example, but it doesn't tell you why that's happened. If you look at an example, someone might be the top goal scorer in the league, and then one game they have several shots on goal, but they don't actually score a single attempt. What isn't displayed in the data is the fact that the opposition had a really good centre-back who was putting a lot of pressure on the striker, who then had to also be a world-class keeper. Another issue is the fact that the participant is aware that they are being observed, then their performance could change for the better or worse. For example, they may become highly aroused by the fact that they have an audience and so perform better. However, they could also become anxious and their performance levels might decrease because of the fact that they now have an audience watching.